So once again, Ohio gozaimasu for those in Japan, and good evening for those from the United States, even the Western Hemisphere, depending on where you're joining from. And we're really glad that you could join us for this program to discuss about Japanese business, specifically about opening and beginning a business in Japan. It's a great time to be part of this network. And Doug will speak more about the reopening of Japan, which just occurred this week. For those of you not familiar with the Japan America Society of Dallas Fort Worth, it is an organization that connects Japanese Americans through public programming in business, policy, education, culture, international exchange, and language classes. You can learn more about Japan America Society of Dallas Fort Worth at jasdfw.org, and I will share a link in the chat box later for you to all see. For those of you who do not know who I am, my name is Paul Pass. I am the executive director of the Japan America Society of Dallas Fort Worth. And although we are primarily back to in-person events in North Texas, we are also offering online programs, as is the case for today's conversation on US-Japan economic relations. If it has been a while since you attended a Zoom webinar, this is not a meeting, it's actually considered a webinar, which means that you will not be able to interact directly with the speakers. However, you will be able to connect with them through the Q&A function. So that will allow you to ask questions. Again, if you have questions for the speakers, the moderator, please use the Q&A function, which is at the bottom of your screen. If you have questions directly for our team about operations, about how your Zoom is working perhaps, then please use the chat function. So we will be monitoring those boxes throughout the program. I will stay brief. And so at this time, I would like to welcome our program partner and our moderator, Doug Bruhnke, who is the founder and CEO of the Global Chamber, to begin the event. Doug, the floor is yours.
Paul, we really appreciate the collaboration on this event. I know we've collaborated in the past over the last number of years, Global Chamber with Japan America Society, but thank you for being a leader, and we look forward to having a great conversation today or this afternoon or this morning, wherever you are around the world. When Paul approached us to do this event and educate the community about what opportunities there are in Japan and how best to be successful in Japan, he asked, do you know anybody that could speak on that topic? And boy, we know a few, and I can't think of three better people to speak to about this, especially such a monumentally historic week, this week, as Japan opens up its borders to foreigners again, which is really awesome. So what we're going to start with is we're going to do some introductions of the three extraordinary speakers that we have here today, and then we're going to get into some topics on new opportunities and what to think about for you and your business as you consider growing in Japan in 2023. Our first speaker is Catherine O'Connell of the Catherine O'Connell law firm. She is the first foreigner to set up a law firm in Japan, in Tokyo. And so Catherine, beyond that, over the decades that you've been doing business in Japan, you've just had an extraordinary reach with both large companies and small companies. And so I'm wondering, I'm going to ask each of you for just a couple-minute introduction of yourself, but also a reaction to what's going on in your head as at last it appears that the borders are opening up. What's your reaction? And then what else should we know about Catherine O'Connell as we get started?
Thanks so much, Doug. It's just such a pleasure to be here, and I'm really glad to be able to give you some of the information that I have inside my head and inside my heart. To tell you about this adopted country of mine, Japan. It's really a place where all of the speakers today are love and spend their time. I'm originally from New Zealand. In 3 weeks' time, I'll celebrate my 20th anniversary of arriving in Japan and working here. As you said, Doug, I am a Tokyo-based senior business lawyer. I also do coach mentoring for other lawyers. I'm a podcaster. I do 2 podcasts about Japan and coming into Japan and talking with Japanese and foreign lawyers here. I'm also a board member on 2 boards. And so it's really my mission, Doug, here to be making law more accessible to people. And most people can't really hire a full-time lawyer. So what I do is outside general counsel services and have people hire me just for part-time or small projects over a long period of time. And so over the pandemic, things have been okay for me in terms of having business continue because of the way that we're communicating right now online. And so that's been fine for me. However, we are super pleased that Japan has reopened its borders this week on the 11th. Today it's the 13th in Japan. So 2 days ago, the borders opened. It means that anyone can come into the country. It's been trickling in over the last little while with various openings, but now it's completely open. You do need to come in with a triple vaccination or a certificate that you've had a PCR 72 hours before. But aside from that, we have people coming in. I'm meeting a person today for a coffee or maybe something stronger who came in on the 11th, exactly on that day. I did hear on the media that there weren't a lot of people coming in using this new way of coming in. Most people returning on the 11th were returnees who are residents or people who came in on the usual business visa. So we wait to see, and maybe Matthew's got some more on that as well, but we are super excited. It just is going to change the whole complexion of Japan, and we can't wait to see what happens with everybody coming back through. And hopefully you too, Doug, sometime soon.
Spring, that's definitely my target. So I'm looking forward to it. Thank you. Yeah, we've never met in person, and I can't wait to have a glass of wine or whatever is appropriate. Our next speaker is another extraordinary leader. I think all three of these folks are not only founders, but they're leaders in their own area. I think a founder, right? Shinichiro Suzuki. Was it you or your father that started the business? I'm wondering now, because I started to think whether you had or not, but I do know that Suzuki-san is someone that I passed in the night by accident when he lived in the United States. We both lived in the Detroit area calling on the automotive industry at the same time over the same number of years. And so we might have even eaten at the same little Japanese restaurant on 14 Mile Road, which I forget the name of, which was like the Japanese restaurant in Detroit. And so Suzuki-san has progressed to running his company out of Tokyo. He helps companies land in the United States. And so I've got to believe, Suzuki-san, that this is a big day for you and your business, because part of your business is connecting companies, US companies included, into Japanese automotive suppliers, into the automotive industry and construction and industrial, basically creating the bridge for companies to be successful in Japan. And that's probably been really hard the last couple of years. It's going to be a little bit easier for you. What's your reaction?
Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. おはようございます。こんにちは、こんばんは. Well, thanks a lot for the introduction, Doug-san. Yes, indeed. We probably, were living in Michigan at the same time, and the restaurant you were talking about should be Nipponkai. Is that right? 14 Mile Road, and I think that was Crooks or something, right?
Yep.
Well, anyway, yeah, I'm not the founder of the company. My father did, but in 57 years ago, in the year of 1965. So since the establishment, we have been helping overseas firms who wanted to do business in Japan or with Japanese companies. Yes, Doug-san, you're right. For the last few years, it's been really hard because almost nobody from overseas could come, but the border is really wide open, as she said. So I'm really excited about this event and look forward to working with all overseas companies, firms who wanted to do business in Japan or with Japanese companies. I'm running a global business development firm to help overseas firms to do the job or to be successful. So once again, thanks for the opportunity, and I'm very excited to join this event as a panelist. Thanks.
Welcome, our pleasure. Last but definitely not least is the 7 foot tall, unusual Gaikokujin from Tokyo. You won't necessarily see very many. I have seen a 7-footer in the Tokyo on the Yamanote line once, and the person towered over the train. I'm 6'4", and I felt like I was, I always have to duck in the.
Doug, you're a giant in this country.
So I gotta believe that you live a very charmed life. People probably wanting to come up to you and get your autograph constantly. Matthew is also a basketball player, both professionally, and I've seen you on Facebook where you're actually playing and 3-on-3s and things like that, staying in shape. So congratulations on that. More maybe on point with today's conversation is Matthew is the co-founder of WeConnect. And they're not only knowledgeable about business in Japan, but what's really valuable is they're able to literally connect systems between Japan and other countries all across Asia and the world, which is an incredibly important aspect of global business. How do you get everything on the same page and do it affordably and easily? And so, Matthew, thank you so much for all that you guys do at WeConnect. This is a very amazing week for both you and your wife, who's a member through her travel company, Arigato Travel. How are both of you handling the excitement of the borders opening up?
Boy, Doug, your introductions are just top. We're very excited. It's been a long time. Speaking for Arigato Travel, we got a number of emails coming through for tours in November, December, next spring. So it's kind of it's a relief because the last 3 years were not easy to navigate in the tourism industry. But yeah, so hi everybody. I'm Matt, co-founder and chief commercial officer of WeConnect, representing our Japan office today. As Doug said, I'm a former professional basketball player turned consultant. And over the past 12 years, I've helped over 2,000 companies enter the Japan market by supporting with their business formation or employee acquisition, getting a bank account for them, doing their accounting, payroll, tax, corporate secretarial compliance. The team and I have supported companies like Netflix, Tesla with their market entry, and companies like Google and Dolce & Gabbana with restructuring their back office processes. Needless to say, I've seen a lot in Japan, especially from my high vantage point. I can see the top of the trains and the top of the taxis and top of the buildings. And I'm really happy to be here. And then as Doug said, we run a tourism business. So, very historic week, very excited. If anybody wants to know more, you can go right here, weconnect.co/Japan. We have some cool resources there to hopefully open up the kimono and really understand what's going on in Japan.
That's awesome. Thank you all for being here today. Really excited to dig the next layer deeper. We have some questions for each of the panelists, and probably what we should do is I'll ask each of you a question, and then feel free if you'd like to supplement or add comments to the first person that I ask. And the first person and the first question I'd like to direct toward Catherine O'Connell. And that's a question regarding maybe somewhat general, but perhaps specifically, as companies are thinking about Japan and entering the market, what are some of the key markets that you're seeing? One of the great things about you, and there's so many, we probably could spend the entire hour just listing them all out, but you touch everything in terms of markets and segments, big companies and small companies. And so there's a lot of history in Japan, right, in terms of people doing business. But as you think about post-COVID and you think about 2023 as a company thinking about the market, where do you see some of the real great opportunities and maybe evolution of the market that we may not be aware of? You're right there on the ground, and so you're seeing that every day.
Wow, there's just so much here, and I think there's a bundle of opportunities. What I will start out with, Doug, is that, industries here are crying out for talent. And now the borders are open, we need the talent coming in. And the second thing is there's a lot of opportunity for collaborations between money-rich Japan companies and innovation-rich US companies. So if I just go into that a bit on the talent pool, Japan's need for foreign workers here has never been higher. in order for Japan to continue to hit its GDP targets, it needs 4.2 million foreign workers by 2030. And actually at the moment, Japan is destined to fall short of that target by about 500,000 workers. So we need people, and they need to come in on areas such as nursing care. And I see there's a question in the Q&A about nursing arrangements, so we might get into that. Nursing care, farming, fishing, construction have dire labor shortages, and especially in the rural area. And Matthew, I'm sure, can speak about the hospitality industry. People who were managers who were running hotels were actually going in there and making the beds, cleaning the rooms, because there was such a shortage. Second, on the collaboration point, Japan businesses are typically cash heavy. They're sitting on what's often called war chests of cash. So they are looking for collaborative partners. And let's just go into that, especially with startups, right? So Japan has more than 10,000 startup businesses. The average seeding funds that you need here for startup funds, around $500,000 US. There could be differences there, but obviously in the industries of advanced manufacturing, robotics, fintech, and life sciences, those are really important industries that I think US companies can get into. In terms of more on sectors, technology, digital banking, green hydrogen is booming, and repurposing waste products into different products. I know a company that's doing coffee grains and the leftover product from beer manufacturing and sake manufacturing, and turning those into other food products. So I could give examples, but those are some of the brief industries. I know we're limited for time. So those are a quick hit on the industries and sectors. Doug.
Interesting on the hydrogen one, because that one is in an area, as someone involved with automotive, as you have been, Suzuki-san, as well. Nissan and others have been working on hydrogen for decades, and suddenly it's come back, and the Japanese government is supporting, inventions not just in automotive but for home heating and other areas. So it's really exciting to see. My bet is that, even though I was told by a European recently that it's not interesting to him because Europe is so far advanced, I don't think that's the case. Suzuki-san or Matthew, would you like to add anything to what Catherine talked about? Yeah. Certainly, if you have anything related to hydrogen, I'd love to learn more there as well.
Yeah, not so familiar with the hydrogen situation, but in terms of the opportunities in Japan, in the last 2 months, we've had 3 companies come in to set up to acquire real estate assets. There's a lot of operating assets like hotels, residential buildings that are on sale, and with the weekend, it's like a double sale for those that have dollars or cash reserves. Age tech, as Catherine mentioned, age tech is always an opportunity here with the aging population. And then, as also Catherine mentioned, hotels desperately need support. So if you can come in and provide a workforce, low-level workforce that does a good job cleaning, that's an opportunity. I think one of the most interesting things is, especially for like enterprise technology companies, they're looking at longer sales cycles, and maybe a year or 2 years ago that would cost you 210 million yen, which was like $2 million. Now that's going to cost you $1.44 million, with the weekend. So the opportunities are abound, given the discount that it is available to do anything here. But yeah, there definitely are areas that are more capable. There's even my neighbor who is also a lawyer, his friend's family that owned a hotel for generations just sold it to a foreign buyer. So it's happening. I don't know how much longer it's going to happen, given this historic week. Maybe some of these companies that were or hotels or operating assets that were for sale, maybe they come off the market because business comes back. But there's still probably an opportunity for some time.
Interesting. And yet there's this labor shortage. And Catherine, I can't get that 4.2 million person in addition to now, and yet there's tremendous shortages already. I remember we had a global chamber event where we were talking about hospitality, where people hadn't even started coming in yet, and yet there were shortages. in that world. So what's going to happen when people start coming in? Suzuki-san, what are your perspectives on either the labor part of it or some of the opportunities that you're seeing, because you have so much grasp of automotive, industrial, construction, and some of those types of industries? I'll bet you're seeing some growth opportunities.
Oh, sure. Just want to re-emphasize a few keywords. Cash heavy, yes, definitely yes. If you find a customer, sooner or later, they're gonna ask you, do you have enough cash to sustain your business? Japanese companies hate to see once they started doing business, but the supplier is out of cash, they don't want to see it. Well, nobody wants to see it. Second, innovation or new cutting edge technology, those are the key words for American companies to be very successful in Japan. If you can offer those, I bet Japanese customers will listen to you very carefully. They would love to, hear those words from overseas firms. So,
and I think the basis of that might be that, if you just have a Me Too product and it can be supplied by a Japanese supplier, just like anywhere in the world, right? They're going to buy a local product. That's kind of somewhat of a no-brainer. However, if you do have something unique and different and advanced, they're going to be open and active. And from my own experience working with DuPont, it's not just one product, but you mentioned about cash. Do you have the research and development? Do you have the future capability that is worth their time to invest in you?
exactly.
And so it's a strategic thought process. It's not trying to keep foreign companies out. It's if it's in their best interest, they're going to do it, right? Isn't that how? I mean, is that how you should look at it?
I've got a great example too, Doug, if I can, because even though it's a New Zealand company, I just want to show it because it's a great example. There's a New Zealand company called Imager, IMAGR, and it gives you real insight into this collaboration in the cash heavy industry with Japanese companies here. Imager is a technology company. It helps people skip the checkout lines by AI powered smart carts. So the camera sees, like the human, what you're putting into the cart. And Imager raised $8 million in its A series funding round, and it got Toshiba Tech Corporation to help them. So they've got the tech. Toshiba Tech has the money, and so they're now collaborating together here, and it's being rolled out in Japan. So that's an example of what's going on, and it's just a New Zealand company, a little company down under, but they're able to do it. So I think US companies are more, perhaps even sophisticated in different ways, can do similar things.
Absolutely. Matthew, do you have any additional comments regarding this question? Or the next question for you is, I kind of wanted to get into kind of the landscape more generally in Japan, and particular the Japanese government and its support of a variety of initiatives. I want to get into women in the workforce, but in the meantime, are there programs, are there initiatives for the Japanese government to encourage companies from abroad, including the United States, to land in Japan, either through incubators or other initiatives to encourage that these days?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people would be pretty surprised at the wealth of resources available. It's just sometimes it's hard to find them. For example, there's a ton of things posted on the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry website, the meti.go.jp/English. So there's a lot of things posted up there. But
you seem to have that memorized.
I've been to the website before. But those are more targeted sort of support. Like they want certain manufacturing sites set up. They want regional data centers. They want semiconductor investment. So that's kind of what they're pushing. And then other agencies like the Financial Services Agency, I mean, they've been on a crusade for over a decade, if not more, to bring financial talent to Japan, competing with the likes of Hong Kong and Singapore. And I mean, as of now, they're giving the biggest subsidy ever, up to $250,000 to set up pay for the setup costs, initial ongoing costs, recruitment costs, my invoice, so I like it. Catherine's invoice, everybody's invoice. So, you know, it's that's really helpful, but that's really just for the financial sector. And then, you know, there are certain programs from JETRO that also are there. And then the government, the cabinet office has also really wants to support startups that to become, you know, they really want to be the, you know, a land of unicorns too. So they have kind of put out this startup visa kind of path to get to Japan. You know, the startup visa, it sounds like it's going to be like super smooth and easy. There are some hurdles and challenges, but you know, if you're definitely a company that would like to, you know, grow within Japan and even beyond, then this is definitely a path to consider. It's definitely a path that they want you to commit to Japan. You know, they're going to come and make sure you have an office, and they're going to visit you, and they want you to make money and hire people. So, you know, but the startup visa is an interesting one for anybody at any stage of their business in the earlier stages to come and do business here.
That's great. I think there's kind of a running joke in most countries is the good and bad news is that the government is here to help you. They don't always, in every country, work at the speed of business. I presume that you feel that there's enough real positive there to be able to support companies coming in. I'm wondering where would you start as a company to be able to access it? Is it just connecting JETRO or connecting certainly, you know, to any of the folks here on the panel will have access to it, but is it as simple as that?
Some of the subsidies you have to apply for before you have a company here. So if you kind of jump the gun, you automatically disqualify yourself. So I would say, you know, definitely talk to JETRO, look at the Medi site, look at, if you're in the financial industry, look at the FSA site, and then for immigration, there's not so much great information out there on the startup visa. We actually just released an article on this because it was a little confusing. But, you know, there's information out there as well on the startup visa. So definitely, you know, you want to interact with these agencies and government people before you are too far along, because sometimes you get disqualified.
I see. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. We're kind of touching. Well, maybe I'll take one step back in terms of kind of the overall process here. We have a series of questions that I'll be going through with all the speakers, and we'll talk on each question as far as we feel like it makes sense. We'll also answer any questions that come in from the audience. I noticed, Catherine, that there's actually one that's more legal oriented in terms of setting up a company. I don't remember exactly what the specific question was, but I got the gist of it, that if you're a company coming into Japan and you wanted to purchase or acquire a company in Japan, is that even possible? And what are some of the things to consider when you're thinking about that?
Oh, it sure is. It sure is. And I think, you know, I'm not the expert in that area, but I would say that if you do, honestly, the Google is your amazing tool. And I say that not just searching anywhere. The top 4 law firms in Japan, Japanese law firms, put out M&A articles regularly, and they are absolutely spot on with all the things that you need to know about coming into Japan and doing M&A. It's a complicated process. There are many rules. Once you go through all of the hurdles, you can certainly buy a company here. And Matthew may have some recent examples of that. But I would say, honestly speaking, Nishimura Asahi, all of the companies here that operate, big law firms, they have simple English documents that are already out on the internet. So if you search M&A Japanese law firms, you will find it there. It's not really the area that I do. I don't do M&A so much as when the companies have already set up, I help them with other areas such as contracting, employees, contracting, getting their supplier contracts in place, working for them as a general outside general counsel advisor. So may not answer your question, but I think going to the source is going to cut through a lot of that. And perhaps Matthew's got something on that.
I love this M&A question because I have a great story about this that I think Americans will just really get a kick out of. Anybody, a couple of years ago, I think going on 6-7 years ago, we had a publicly listed company called, I think it was called Skyworks, and they wanted to vertically integrate their supply chain, including a very specific semiconductor product for their business. And in order to do that, there was only like 4 engineers in the world that were in a Panasonic tower in Nagoya. And they wanted to acquire the fifth tower where these 4 guys were. And, they came in, and for a year they were talking to Panasonic about acquiring this facility. And, after all the terms were kind of like negotiated, it got down to one point that I think foreigners just are going to be like, what? and Skyworks thought that the deal wasn't going through because they weren't paying enough. So they were saying, okay, we'll give you more money. Okay, we'll give you more money. But Panasonic was like, we don't care about that. We just don't want you to fire anybody for 2 years. And then Skyworks was like, I get it. You want more money. And they were like, no, we don't. We want you not to fire anybody for 2 years. You got that, Americans? and then finally they got it. And it was just the funniest thing because, I mean, talk about 2 different companies. Skyworks, super fast semiconductor, move at the speed of light. Panasonic factory, they get in at 8:30, 8:45, they do jumping jacks. 11:15, they get in line for the cafeteria. It's totally different world. And so it took another year to finally get over that hump. And so, M&A, while there's processes and you can totally do it, and yes, the big law firms are going to help and be able to help you. There are some points in the process that are just going to be like really just spin, like send your head for a spin, because this is a different country, different culture, different values,
different paradigm. Suzuki-san, what's your reaction to that? Probably you've had a number of different cases where you've run into this both directly and indirectly.
Indeed, yes. In the past, I helped Japanese companies sell their businesses to overseas firms. So long story too short, yes, it is possible. So mainly, first of all, 2 key words: public companies or private companies. If public companies, it's going to be more complicated. If a private company, it's not going to be complicated as it would be to purchase public companies. Second, employees in Japan are very protected by Japanese laws. Like Matt said, if buy a Japanese company and wanted to hire all employees, you may be running into a big issue. So once again, buying a company shouldn't be so difficult, but you want to make sure every single details, and you do need to aware what local rules and laws you have to follow.
It's the priority being still these employment laws are carrying over from the past, and you need to be aware of that.
Yes.
Historically, and I'm probably dating myself, but historically, at least on the public side, the way to Japan was not acquisition, but more toward the joint venture. Where does that stand these days? My gut says that it's not always required now to create a joint venture, where it might have been the case 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago to do that. It's possible for a foreign company to come into Japan and be successful independently, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, definitely. I really think it depends on the industry, how much money you have to invest, how patient you are. I think that a lot of companies try to come in and do it the American way these days, which can be good, can be bad. I see one of the questions in the question and answer section, which industries are under protection, quote unquote. Let's quote that, protection. And you can look at examples like Airbnb. They came in, were operating at like America for a number of years, but then the hospitality and accommodation industry caught up with them and thought what they were doing was unfair. And the word unfair in Japan is very, very important word. And so they were hit. I think 80 or 90% of their listed properties were taken off because the listees, the people that were running the Airbnbs, didn't have a Minpaku license, which just came into existence in like 2 weeks. So no one could get it in time. And then there's also Uber. Everyone probably is familiar with Uber. In Japan, Uber exists, but it just connects to a black taxi. It doesn't have just random people driving their own cars around. Uber tried, but there was definitely a brick wall that they ran into in terms of Japan. So what that means is the more capable a domestic industry is in Japan, the harder it's going to be for you to usurp them or to come in and stand next to them or overtake them, because that's just what it is. And earlier it was mentioned how if there isn't a local product or isn't a local service or isn't a traditional way of doing things, and that usually is more on the tech side, but there can be anything, it could be physical products or anything. If Japan isn't doing it well, it doesn't have something, then it's easier to come in and say, hey, look at this shiny new thing. We can totally improve your business. And that's a lot easier. And so, also another great example I'd love to mention is Apple. When the Apple store started in Japan, they did it the Japanese way. They came in and everyone was like, and like, don't talk to the customer until they want to talk to you. But now if you go to the Apple store in Shibuya or Ginza, that wasn't working. But now if you go to the Apple store in Ginza or Shibuya or wherever, and it's a very chaotic, it's just like America, and it's working. So there's no right or wrong answer in terms of what to do on your own. Can you do it on your own? It's really just a matter of going down the process and patience here.
Okay. So it is case by case, product by product, segment by segment. There are probably some things that are very standard, like packaging, for instance, right?
Oh, yeah.
Don't ever give them bad packaging,
No.
no matter what you're doing, right?
No.
There are certain things that we don't necessarily think of in other countries that are kind of deal killers. Catherine, I think I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I think you wanted to add on to what Matthew was saying.
No, I think a couple of things. Matthew's spot on about Panasonic. I worked for them for 4 years. We go by dings and bells and moving up to the cafeteria and all that sort of thing. Things have changed a little bit, but not much. But it's how they're very cohesive, I should say, too. And I think he hit on a very key word of collaboration, right? This collaboration thing, and joint ventures is certainly still happening, but you're providing something that's different, right? So there's another example of a company called Kogo, C-O-G-O. They've collaborated on digital banking in Japan. And banking in Japan is an industry that needs a lot of disruption. It's all paper-based. So this company's introducing a carbon footprint tracking app. Now, that might seem like, what's that got to do with banking? But they've collaborated with mega bank Mizuho. Like, they've been able to get a green subsidy from the Tokyo metropolitan government, and they are doing a carbon footprint integration for Mizuho Bank's customers, so the customers can see transparency around the data of their carbon footprint. Again, here's a small company that's gone and got a subsidy. They've gone and approached a mega bank in Japan, not by themselves, but through another company in Japan that's helped them. It's a lot of work to do it, but what a celebration for something like that that's going to probably disrupt the market here. So it's looking for things like that are collaborative, innovative. Again, joint ventures are not going out of fashion. They're very much in style.
Hey, and Doug, just to touch on your packaging comment, given the audience, I just am excited to share this because it just, again, blows your mind. One of our clients, I'm not going to say the name because this is actually a negative story, but one of our clients had a beverage that they had bottled, and they brought it into Japan and combined the raw materials to the final product in Japan, but the contract manufacturing process wasn't perfect. And when the first shipment of beverages to 7-Eleven showed up, the printing of the label was slightly off. Everything was sent back, and so everybody was sad. so packaging is important in Japan.
Yeah. Don't even think about it, right? It's like, maybe it's good enough. If you're thinking
No,
that, it's
no.
probably the answer is no. Suzuki-san, I'll bet you've got horror stories out the wazoo on that one because of the industries you're in, and having been similar to for me, and having, I used to have dark hair like you until we started supplying the Japanese automotive industry, and the concept of what a quality product is in one country and what it is in Japan. It's not a trade barrier. It's a realistic way that they look at it. And we can blame Dr. W. Edwards Deming, by the way, who was an American, for the Toyota production system, and incorporating that into Japan, and why they're so good, and why they think many ways, and why they think the way they do. So Suzuki-san, definitely, as you coach companies coming into Japan, invariably you're giving them thoughts about how to be prepared, what to say and what not to say. And then from a manufacturing perspective, things they should be watching out for. I'll bet you've got a few, probably some bad stories, but probably some really good stories as well.
Sure. Yeah. Like a quality is already given, right? As you know, Doug said, if bad quality, out of game, no way. Quality first, as always, for no matter what you supply or you manufacturing, or you service. Because high quality, Japanese people have a strong tendency for high quality services or products or whatever you supply or you sell. And second, so cost. So getting back and touch on a little bit about joint venture, yes, definitely, yes, that can be a case. But you may want to start with TAA, Technical Assistance Agreement, to slowly get your foot in, to establish a good relationship with a Japanese company. It's kind of a slow process. You don't want to jump in and, hey, here's a deal. You want to buy it or not? You don't want to buy it. Just take time and establish a good relationship with them. Then it may last long for mutual benefits. So jumping in, and so manufacturing wise, oh yes, definitely. Quality, cost, delivery, 3 keywords first. Then, okay, what do you have in your technology or innovation, whatever we call R&D and program management? So 5 words: quality, cost, delivery, R&D, and program management. Those are the keywords you want to make sure you are ready to compete with your competitors around the world, not just Japanese.
Yeah.
I see many overseas firms doing well here in Japan.
And my belief has been and continues to be, if you can be successful in Japan with your quality and delivery, you can be successful anywhere. It's part of the strategic value of competing in Japan, because the bar is higher. Before we get off this subject, and Suzuki-san, while we have you, I'm wondering, in terms of the sales process, historically, you've seen a dramatic, I think, change over the last 20, 30 years plus, where there used to be all sorts of dealers in the chain, and you would, basically be selling to one person who'd be selling to another, and then eventually it would get up to the end user. And very often those were financial rather than some value added process in within the chain. I'm wondering, what is the situation today, and what do you see going forward relative to the number of folks you need to work with to be able to sell directly? Isn't it becoming a lot easier to sell directly?
Yes, compared to before, yes. Answer to your question, used to be hard or more difficult, but these days now much more open. And you should be able to see, overseas firms should be able to see great or big opportunities here in Japan, directly selling to Japanese companies. But once again, you want to make sure your company is big enough, because unless otherwise you have a super huge cutting edge technologies or something very unique, it's maybe hard to sell directly unless otherwise your company is big. Let's say if your company is a multi-billion-dollar company, you should be able to look at such opportunities. If not, let's see.
Got it. That makes sense. So it's, to some extent, that complicated chain is a mitigation of risk. And you're basically saying if you've lowered the risk in other ways, like you're financially stable, they'll be more amenable to work with you directly.
Yes.
I don't mean to put words in your mouth, but that's what I got. And I hadn't thought of it in those terms before. I thought of it in more derogatory terms, I think, quite honestly, in the past, because of having to deal with all those folks that were taking money along the way and really wondering what value are you adding. But when you think of it in terms of risk, maybe that's a more positive way to look at it. Catherine, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, not only risk, but also those people along the chain have all got different specialities. It's so Japan to have a person who does a certain thing, another person who does another thing. And Matthew and I, in the same sort of business, we have different lawyers who do different things. There's 8 or 9 or 10 different lawyers in Japan who all do different things. There's work
So
that
one
I
of
can't
those
do in
things
my
might
chain.
be one of those might be having a country club membership at a particular country club. I mean, it gets down to those kinds of things.
Very important role.
Yeah, well, I mean, lawyers, there's different lawyers who do immigration, who do tax, who do social security, who do
On the services side. I got you.
I'm still doing distribution agreements. They're still very much part of Japanese society. On the other hand, if you think of the food and beverage market, Costco have really come into Japan and disrupted here. You can deal directly with Costco. And on Shin's point, if you have volume, right, you need to be having the volume to supply to Costco that can go through. So if you've got the volume in your product, for example, wine or food, and you can go into Costco directly and avoid the distribution network. But generally speaking, in my view, it's still a very buoyant market. I don't think distribution and all the people involved in that chain are going away quickly, but there's a little bit happening there.
Sounds good. Hey, Paul, I think you're still there. I just wanted to do kind of a time check in terms of how long we're allowed to speak. I mean, we could talk for the next 5 or 6 hours, but probably that wouldn't.
We might forget we're on a webinar after a while.
Exactly. I'm learning a lot here. So what time should we be targeting to wrap things up? And did you want to ask any questions along the way?
Well, I think we're at a point where we could address the audience questions in the Q&A box, and then we could, I believe, the next 10 minutes or so, we could wrap up the event.
Oh, okay, perfect. That works out really well. I want to circle back on the labor question, and it kind of relates to at least one of the questions. The question about are there I'm speaking just kind of not directly reading the question, but the question was something about, interactions between Japan and other countries. Are there agreements like for medical workers and other workers, like Philippines having nurses come in to Japan? I would imagine things like that, or IT workers from Bangladesh. Are there mega agreements like that available? And then are we seeing, or would you expect an uptick in those things, considering what's happening and the shortages that are not just happening now, but are probably get worse?
I'll start off there, Doug. I mean, the United States and Japan cooperate on a broad range of issues. There are lots of agreements in place: global health, environmental, resource protection, women's empowerment. They're promoting integrity across like 5G networks. There's a question there about cybersecurity. Most definitely cybersecurity and information technology are areas that America and Japan have got agreements on. They're into people and people ties in education, science, other areas. And so very much so, I think before you set out on your journey, or as you are on your journey, look for those existing arrangements that are already there and how you can get onto the coattails perhaps of those formal arrangements. For example, US-Japan Science and Technology Agreement. There you go, the US and Japan Science and Technology Agreement. That's been going for 25 years, and it's being moved on over the last 5 and 10 years, looking at scientific research, new energy technology, supercomputing, cybersecurity, critical materials. It's all there. Joe Biden and Prime Minister Kishida last year at the summit in Tokyo reaffirmed the country's security alliance. right? They're moving to have cooperation in technology and innovation. So to that question in the chat, yes, definitely. That's an area, space technology, et cetera, right, is also happening. So I would say yes, there's a lot of existing arrangements there. I just had a quick look on the California Society, and I'm sure Dallas-Fort Worth Japan American Society has something different. It's a group in California called the US-Japan Healthcare Connection, and they're doing this, bringing US and Japan healthcare, connecting people and resources across the countries. So maybe there's obvious places, but unobvious places, perhaps with the societies that start at people-to-people level. You can find a lot of people and resources within these Japan-US societies, which might take you somewhere which you didn't think about initially. And so I wouldn't look past societies like we're on today with Dallas-Fort Worth.
Yeah, just to add on to that, I think that, any agreements, subsidies, documentations, opportunities that are written in English on the internet, that's a good place to kind of get a base of understanding of what's possible. But that may not actually represent reality once you get into the meat and potatoes of things. So be prepared for, some zigs and zags. And, I can't tell you how many times that we've maybe helped a company get a license with the Tokyo Metropolitan Government. And, by the 2/3 of the way into the process, we're off script. We're just so off script. And the government is just kind of like, we're just going to make it up from here, but we'll let you know. I'm like, okay.
Sounds good. I probably have a couple questions, and then I'll ask each of you to just do a wrap up of things either we forgot to mention or something else that you'd like to say or anything in recap. The question I have, it's for you, Suzuki-san, and then for all of you, I want to start with and the electric vehicle market, but I want to kind of broaden it to what are some of the really dynamic changing markets in Japan. And when we think, especially somebody like me who spent a couple decades in the automotive industry, to think about what's happening, the revolution that's happening from gas-powered vehicles to electric vehicles in the US, in Europe, we're wondering, and it was one of the questions in the chat area, what's the status in Japan with electric vehicles and how disruptive is that? And are there some other industries that you can think of that are going through similar disruption that might be then an opportunity for people outside to get involved?
In Japan, talking with automotive companies, everybody talks about electric vehicles, but not mainly for Japan. Well, yeah. I kind of hate to see, being in the industry, Japanese market for electric vehicle is still a lot far behind other countries, especially compared to the United States. If I'm not wrong, there is no such a law here in Japan by whatever the year, let's say 2030, you cannot sell gas vehicles. There is no such laws here in Japan yet. Maybe because Japan is not such a big country. Honshu Island of Japan is just about the same size as California. United States is about 26, maybe 27 times bigger than Japan. Maybe that's why.
Got it. It also is going to be very disruptive, right? The simplification of the processes. And I spent 2 decades calling on people who made valve stem seals and oil cooler hose, and what happens to those companies. So it's I think the word I wrote down was unfair earlier, and that I'm trying to get my head around that word unfair and what it really means. And in the case of when a disruptive technology comes in and it displaces workers, is that one meaning of unfair? And is that why sometimes change is so difficult?
Fair, unfair, it's kind of tricky word, because compared to gas vehicles, the number of suppliers for electric vehicles should be 1/3. It's kind of happening anyway, one way or the other.
Yeah.
No matter you like it or you don't like it, it's happening. It's a fact.
Yeah. I think it goes back to, I think what you, Matthew, you were talking about collaboration, or one of you collectively talked about, if you come in with a product that's disruptive and it's a win, for everybody, including in the chain, and it doesn't hurt anybody. So that's the caveat, right? Like an Uber coming in, it seems to be a winner from a lot of different perspectives, except those taxi drivers that are very strong. That's going to be difficult. But if it's something that you can create the collaboration and a win-win all the way around, and thinking in those terms, perhaps that's going to be a lot more successful. I'll bet, Matthew, you've worked on a few of those over time.
Well, I mean, maybe Catherine has some more ideas about what big disruptions might be happening on an industry level. But for me, I see the disruption more on a general level. How did COVID impact Japan? Initially, companies were really struggling to figure out remote work and how to deal with all of that. A number of my neighbors work in more traditional SMEs, and they were called back to the office probably earlier than people wanted to go, or foreigners would have accepted. I've had a few Japanese friends say that, in confidence to me, again, I can't say any names because it's, secret, but they said, "Hey man, I really like working from home, but don't tell anyone." and I found that really interesting, because, obviously the company sets forth the policies and everyone has to abide by the policies, and it goes back to the unfair fair word that Chin said, so complicated in Japan, which is totally true. I saw a big disruption from COVID in terms of the mentality of how to work, but there was definitely a yin to the yang there, with the company still holding on to the traditional way of working in Japan. But there's definitely something disruptive there that's happening, the Japanese people were given a little taste of something different that they kind of like, and so who knows where that'll go. But maybe Catherine can talk more about the disruptive nature of her work with Fujitsu and other things she's seen.
Disruption, including women in the workforce, undoubtedly.
Sure.
The disruption is causing opportunity there as well, probably not at the speed you'd want to see.
Yeah, well, I mean, diversity on boards in Japan, it's still a growing topic. It is a place where US talented people can actually do some work here and make a difference in Japan, especially if they are specialists in ESG, SDGs, manufacturing, M&A, private equity. They can support growth on Japanese boards, especially getting women from US to be on Japanese boards. And many people are actually doing their work that I know who are US women and men. They are doing their work on Japanese boards from their base in the US. It doesn't mean you can't or shouldn't come to Japan, you should. But Japan is in that global gender gap index from the World Economic Forum still very, very low. It's even worse than it was a decade ago, 116 out of 146. So we need to help Japan. There's only less than 10% of the parliamentarians in this country are female. 14% of women are on board. So we need some help there. And I think it's a really great way where America can help. On the work from home front, well, I think, as Matthew's been saying, work from home, or as Fujitsu talks about, work from anywhere, is doable and acceptable. It sounds maybe easy and normal to people who are in the US, but for Japan, it's, as Matthew mentioned, it's been a really big change. It has been a disruptor in a good way, because it's a culture where in the office means you are working. So to change that from in the office means you are working but maybe not working, outside of the office you can also be seen as working. That's a great thing. So companies like the one I just mentioned have adopted work from anywhere. Satellite offices set up in suburbs where workers can not come to the main office, but can go to a satellite office in their suburb and work with people if they wish, or work from a cafe or work from other places, as long as they're delivering. The other difference is that they don't need prior approval. Prior approval is not necessary from their managers, and that's a massive disruption. You can just indicate where you're going to be working from, as long as people know where you are. That's all that's needed. And I mean, that is completely different to pre-COVID, and it's a center of one of the pillars for technology innovation that this board that I'm on is working on to make sure it can roll out to other customers as well to adopt this. So you've got to see what's being done, right? If you see it being done by a big company, things will come through. And if you mentioned Panasonic, they're adopting a 4-day working week. If Panasonic can do it, others can too. So if we get these big companies changing Japan a bit, it's going to be great. And there are areas for US nationalities to come in and help Japan in that way. And disruption is a good thing, but let's have respect. Let's have respect for the Japanese culture. It won't change overnight. Respecting the processes, showing, not telling is a really big thing. I think building rapport, if I'm going into the final area there, Doug, of the final capture of comments, rapport is such an ultimate tool for building up a network and respect amongst people. And then, of course, relationships. Japan is a long game. It's not a quick sprint, it is a marathon. And so I feel it's like a tree. You plant the seed, you see the fruit growing in 1 or 2 years. It's not going to probably grow fruit in the first 6 months. You water it, you give fertilizer, right? So you look after your people here. And I think you'll have, if you do invest really authentically in a relationship building exercise in Japan, you can go far.
Such great points, and especially the respect aspect that can't be forgotten. I'm here in Silicon Valley, even though the background doesn't look like it. And sometimes we run into tech companies or companies generally that have a bit of an arrogance. It's not necessarily American arrogance, it's just arrogance about your product or your service, and you forget the respect. And the synergy and the collaboration and the yin and the yang that's so critically important. I personally think for business anywhere, it's just more important and elevated in Japan. So thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, thank you for starting the wrap up. And sorry, Paul, we're a couple minutes over. I'm going to go to Suzuki-san next, and then to Matthew, and then Paul, turn it back to you. But Suzuki-san, are there any final comments either on that topic or anything else that we should be left with regarding things you'd like to leave the audience with, please?
Sure, yeah. After COVID, we are seeing more opportunities here in Japan. Once again, the border is open, wide open. So welcome to come and do more business here in Japan.
Fantastic. I agree. Short and sweet. Totally. It's time to go. And I'm just to be clear, I'm an unabashed Japan lover. I lived in Japan for 5 years. I love the Japanese culture and food and people and the way things are. And just like everywhere else in the world, it's not perfect, and there are imperfections everywhere, not just in Japan, but in every country with every people. We're imperfect. But in terms of places to do business, I find it to be one of the easiest if you consider some of the things we've talked about today. And Catherine, your point on that respect aspect, no matter where you are in terms of what product or service you're offering, is so critical. Some people just never get it. And the people that do are successful. And Suzuki-san, thank you for bringing that aspect to the marketplace and allowing companies to benefit from both your father and your own experience in the marketplace, not just the connections, but the nuances that are involved in moving a product into the country. So thank you both. Matthew, it looks like you might have the last word. What would you like to share in any final comments?
I mean, I think now's the time to invest in Japan because everything's on a discount the weekend. I mean, you can come here, have a beautiful sushi or teishoku lunch set for 1,000 yen. That's $6.81. Turn back the clocks, right?
Wow.
And so I think that this now is an amazing opportunity to look at business opportunities. If you have a plan and you're maybe reluctant or hesitating to pull the trigger, I think now's the time to kind of put a little bit more thought and effort towards that, because maybe the yen gets a little bit weaker, but who knows how long this is going to last. And then please look at all the resources from the government. And I mean, as I think all of my fellow panelists would say, you can go into Japan on your own, but definitely consider talking to people that have done it before, people that can help certain aspects so you can focus on your core business. Because no matter what you're doing, I would definitely encourage you to have a little bit of help.
Yeah, we didn't talk about the population stability, shall we say, in Japan, or the opportunities that come with it in the healthcare area and aged folks. And so what we've talked about today is a fairly complete kind of overview, but there are many different segments that are available to folks coming into Japan, including the old age market. And Debbie Howard, Catherine, who you know very well, and I know Matthew, you know her, and probably Suzuki-san, you do too. She's been very involved in that as well. And so there are markets and opportunities like that, cosmetics and food and beverage and others that are extraordinary. So Paul, thank you for bringing us all together today to at least put a little bit of a dent in this important topic. What are your final comments, and how would you like to wrap up the program?
Yes. So I can share just gratitude for everyone to join. I know for many of our speakers and some of our attendees, it's very early in the morning in Japan, so we appreciate that. Doug, we appreciate you being in California and joining us in the late afternoon. And we also want to thank all the attendees for being part of this conversation. And we thank you for your questions. And so this is just, again, one step to the gradual, obviously there's the reopening of Japan from an official standpoint, but then there's the reopening of really more people coming back and business increasing over hopefully the next few months and into 2023. And so that's what we would like to see as well from the Japan America Society of Dallas-Fort Worth. Again, I would like to mention, if you want to learn more about Japan America Society, please visit jasdfw.org. Also, please support the Global Chamber at globalchamber.org and visit those organizations, learn more. This program has been recorded, and so we do plan to share it on YouTube shortly. We also will send a message to everyone who registered for this program, so if they were unable to join, they can watch it at a later date. And that's all I have to share for this evening or this morning for those of you in Japan. Again, thank you so much for joining us, and have a wonderful rest of the day or the evening, depending on where you are. Thank you so much.